Welcome everybody to our latest drop-in session. Today's session, which I will get my desktop shared, is looking at Quantify again. So I know a number of you will be familiar with the Quantify module or have used it before, or even have been to one of our previous drop-ins on this topic. What we're going to look at today is actually going to take a slightly different approach to looking at Quantify than what we've done before. Typically in the drop-in sessions, we've sort of gone into the sort of technical aspects of Quantify and how it works. So if you need a bit more information on that aspect, we've certainly got the previous drop-ins recorded and available through YouTube, and we've got other resources that we can share with you. What I'm actually going to look at today is a question that comes up quite a lot from users, depending on the use case or the way in which you're. So we've got we have sort of two very kind of broad areas of use, if you like, for the product. One of them is around doing kind of diagnostics and analysis work, which is very, very focused and targeted at. It might be doing some sort of automation or just trying to identify improvement opportunities and squeeze out efficiencies from processes. And the other one, which is probably the much larger one from our perspective, is the sort of process library approach, where we're building a library of processes. We're going to do all the other things we talked about. We're going to be doing systems implementations, automations, and so on. But the foundation we're building is around a process library. So we're building a lot of content that people are using, perhaps on a day-to-day basis. And some of the feedback we're getting is a bit of confusion as to when and how to apply Quantify in that particular scenario. So that's really what I'm going to take you through today. So what I've got just to kick off is again the sort of standard things that we can use Quantify for. So the Quantify functionality within Skore is all about being able to understand and calculate or quantify how long a process takes and what it costs. We also have some capability in there for helping you start to help you understand resource impacts as well. So do we have enough people in order to do this, a given process, a certain number of times? I'm not going to go into the resource side of it. I'm going to be focusing just on the duration and cost side for this session today. But as I said, we've got plenty of resources if you do want to touch back and look into some of that in more detail. So as I said, Quantify is all about understanding the duration and costs of a process, but also to do it in a quite nice and visual way, and to do it very, very quickly as well. Some of the way that it works in Skore is designed to sort of, it's more about stimulating conversation with people involved in the process, getting them to think about the process. You know, when you ask the question, how long does it take? It's about generating a conversation around that, as opposed necessarily to going out and doing a much more detailed time and motion study where you go and sit with lots of operators, you time every single step to the exact second. There's no reason why you can't do that type of activity and then feed that data into Skore, but often you can arrive at the same answer through having a quick workshop with a group of people and saying, you know, roughly how long do you think this particular step takes, and putting the data in there. So some of the sort of common things that use it for is, you know, we'll have talked about on previous sessions, obviously, but it's actually quite good for identifying hidden costs and bottlenecks in your process. So often having that conversation about how long a particular step takes within a process, and then visualizing it in the way that we can in Skore, as you'll see shortly, often highlights areas that people didn't even think about or realize that were there. Excuse me. One of my favorite ones is often the delays and waits that you often find in processes, often around approval steps. And until you kind of visualize it in this way, you never realize just how big and impactful they can be. It helps you understand the impact of changes and create a business case for potential changes, and that's a key part to what I want to take you through today, because again, I think that's one of the areas that the people idea of, but sort of get stuck trying to work out how to actually do it. So I'm going to walk through that. It might be that you just want to quickly calculate the cost of service, especially if you're selling a service to a customer and you want to say you're trying to understand whether whether you're really making any money on it, or where you might want to adjust it to improve margins, that sort of thing. I mentioned the ability to understand resource usage, so that's sort of understanding capacity. If we wanted to do this 10 times, would we have enough people? Do we need to, what sort of hires do we make? Do we need to make X number of new hires, or can we adjust the process to make up the difference? And I suppose the one I haven't mentioned so far is being able to explore different scenarios. So the tool has the ability to sort of say, all right, well, what does a single iteration of the process look like versus 10 iterations of the process, or 100? What does that look like over a week, a month, or a year? And that becomes quite important when we look at building that business case as well, because often, if you look at a specific process and you identify that process as, say, a delay in it of 15 minutes or something like that, that 15 minutes might not sound like a lot when you're looking at a single iteration of a process, but when you start to simulate out that scenario, suddenly that 15 minutes adds up, and it can be a huge amount over a year. Equally, you can then say, well, what if we remove that wait time from the process? What's the impact that has? And being able to see that very, very quickly is what Quantify and Skore is all about. So let me take you back to the challenge that I think a lot of people are facing, or certainly what we're hearing, is about when to apply Quantify. So we're thinking about this in the context of that idea of we're trying to establish a baseline or standardize our processes through a collaborative process library, but at the same time we want to take advantage of the tools in Skore to be able to identify those improvements and implement those improvements. So I think it's worth just thinking about when and how that happens within the work that you're doing. So what I've got here is a very high level process. We call it the process of process improvement. This is available through our process standards and guidelines, which we ran a session on earlier in the year. Again, if you want to reference that, drop in. We also make these available to existing customers. So if you don't have a copy of this already, certainly get in touch and we can give you a copy. It's a baseline set of standard process standards, but we include this, again, sort of standard approach to how you build your library using Skore and identify potential improvements. And it's really important to consider that there are distinct activities we do here. So if we're starting from the sort of premise that we've got some undocumented processes, or maybe we've got them documented but they're imperfect, or they're out of date. The first thing we have to do is document and standardize those processes to create that sort of baseline, if you like. And that often is a huge a piece of work. And I think what often happens is people are doing that piece of work, but they're also trying to tackle the process improvement piece as well. And the process improvement piece actually is covered by here. We've separated this out as two distinct pieces of work. So the first piece is about documenting and agreeing the, if you like, the as-is process. The second step is about identifying the improvements within that process. And the third step is all about how do you actually implement those improvements that you've identified. So it might be that while you're doing you're capturing your processes initially, people are talking about improvement opportunities and so on, and that's fantastic. But at some point you've got to look at those and go, right, which are the ones we're going to tackle? I'm not going to go into this process in too much detail, but we've got a standard process now. We might go and do some sort of assessment, whether we're looking for wasted time or cost, or we're trying to identify risks within that process. There are various tools that you can do, that you can apply to do that. It might just be asking people what they'd like to do differently, where their pains are, or applying something like lean wastes and so on. Out of that, you'll get some sort of list of things that you'll need to go through and go, okay, well, which of these do we want to attack first? Which one do we want to look at? And so you're going to do some sort of prioritization based on that data you've captured. And it's at that point that you would then start to take that process and or that piece of a process and start to quantify it in order to understand what sort of improvements we could make. So just to bring that to life, if I'm going to jump through to a process example. So here I've got a high level end-to-end process, finance, procure to pay type process. And as you'll know, building these types of processes, you're going to end up with lots and lots of process diagrams, different pieces of the process, all within one model. Trying to quantify a model that has lots of detailed views and lots of steps and all with lots of different roles, all doing different things and different numbers of iterations and within different time frames is very, very difficult to quantify. Very, very difficult to come up with something that will be really meaningful from the dashboard. So as I was saying in my example, you're going to sort of capture your process or your sort of first pass at the process. Here I'm going to go down into the receive invoices part of the process. And here, just to show how this often works, you're in the workshop with the stakeholders, talking about the as-is process and capturing what's happening. And while you're doing that, you're often capturing improvement ideas or improvement opportunities. People are going to be saying things like, look, a lot of the invoices are coming in via email, and yet what we do is we sit there and manually type them all into the accounting system. Is there a way we could do something to improve this? Other steps might be, here's another very manual step we do. The data's already in the system, but we're manually searching through and trying to find the purchase orders. On the approve invoice, there's different levels of approval, and these have different levels of time. We often have to wait and so on for it. So that's your first pass where you get your improvement opportunities, and that helps you identify this as an area that we could look at. And so what we'd want to do at this point, what we recommend you do is, if we're now going to look at this for how we can improve it and potentially quantify it, we recommend actually taking that process and either remapping it somewhere else or exporting it as a separate process. So I'll just quickly show you how to do that. I'm going to go back up to the level above. One easy way of doing this. If I go into editing mode, essentially here what we're going to do is take that allocate invoices or receive and allocate invoices part of the process, and I want to create a separate process that I'm going to go and analyze away from my main process. So if I click on that to highlight that process and then go over to the edit option here, you'll see that there is a tool or a feature in here that allows us to copy that detailed view to a new process. So I can go and define that process. So I don't have to necessarily go and remap the boxes that are under there. I can export those out, as I said, to a separate process in the workspace, and then I can go and work on those and start to tidy them up or look at them in a bit more detail. So I've got an example of where I've done that before, so I'm going to, again, just got it in another tab. So here I've taken that invoice. One of the things we've done here, though, is in the name of the process, I've made it very descriptive. So I'm taking the as is. This is what we currently do today. So I've called that out quite clearly within the title of the process. Now, the other things that this addresses, I know that some people have flagged up, is that often when we're looking at or putting quantification data into our processes, some of that data might be sensitive to certain parts of the organization. So being able to put that quantification data into a process that you've carved out of the sort of official process means you can apply things like access rights so that only the right people can see that particular process. So you'll see in my example here that where we've got the approve invoice piece of the process, we've now added extra boxes because we've split this out to show the different levels that were mentioned in the improvement opportunity. So we can see the different routes that takes through there. The other thing that you'll notice here is that in this case, some of the boxes are green. And if I go into the detailed view, we've got some more green boxes and some orange boxes. What we've done there is we've used the style rules feature to highlight steps that we think are suitable or are suitable for automation in this case. So we're going to say what we're going to change in this process is we think we're definitely going to automate the green boxes, and we'll probably automate the orange boxes, but they might be slightly more difficult. Just as an FYI, the way we do that is we've used a custom field, which we've called automation. We've got a grouping set to either medium, high, medium, or low, and that's to indicate the complexity we think of the automation. And then the style rule is based on those levels of complexity. So it will go green for an easy, orange for a medium, and then I think red for a hard or something similar to that. The next thing you need to do on your as-is version of this process is also to quantify each of the steps. So again, if you haven't seen that already, that's also on the attachment panel. There's a quantify form there. If you haven't added it before, there's a little button that just says add quantification information. You click it and you get this form, and you add the duration. So how long does this particular activity take? What's the volume? So this is for every iteration of this process, how many times does this particular step happen? Is there any wait or delay time? So for example, in our approval process, there's often a wait before somebody approves it of an hour or two or something like that. And then are there any direct costs? So direct costs are things that we might have to pay for doing this particular step. So for example, if we were part of reviewing this email was to print it out on a piece of paper, the direct cost might be the printing cost. So what would it cost for a piece of paper, and the potential ink for that would go in that direct cost. And we do that across all the steps of this process. Just remembering that the way that Skore works is when it does a quantification on a process, it rolls all the information up. So wherever we've got a detailed view, you don't put quantification in if on that particular activity or step if you've put quantification on the steps below it. If you wanted to save yourself a bit of time filling that data out for every step, you know that the volume is exactly the same for everything, and there were no direct costs, and you just wanted to summarize it, then you could. But just remember that if you put quantification on a high level box as well as detailed boxes, it will double count because it'll add them all together. So that gives us our baseline, and at that point we can go and look at Quantify to see what it's telling us. This is where you often might find those sort of hidden bottlenecks. So Quantify is in the business tools. Click Quantify. That opens up. First of all, it gives us a quick dashboard, but you can see I can then go and look at it by duration and by cost. For this example, I've got my Quantify selector set to a single iteration. So I'm only looking at a single iteration at the moment. I've got it set per week, and just to show me per week, that's just a simple way of showing me a single iteration. So if I go and hit duration, obviously tells me, look, this to process one of these invoices takes 3 hours and 44 minutes, but there's actually only 44 minutes of working time. And so when I scroll down and look at this chart, this combination shows us both the actual time that people have spent working on the process, which is the green bits, as well as the delay. So you can see there's a significant amount of delay within this process straight away. We can also look at the costs as well. So I can just have a quick view of what the cost. So we've got no direct costs in this particular process, but the total cost is, in this case, around £15 to £16. We can also see the individual activities and roles and what they cost. That's giving us our baseline. So that's really, really useful to know. You might, again, take in that duration and say, if we could find a way to remove some of this delay, what might the impact be to us? But basically what we've done is we've looked at the process. We've identified that there are some automation opportunities in there, and we have baselined it in terms of the current costs. What we would do at this point is then take that process and create another copy of it, which will be our 2B version. So the new process we're going to design. So again, I've just copied or duplicated that process, and then and this might be run as a third workshop, depending on how you do a design. It might be, in this case with automation, that you're just getting the technical team to sit down and go, well, we can automate these things, and this is how we do it, and this is what the process would look like. So in this case here, at the top level, you can see we've got some steps that now have a system against them as well as a user. This step here, which was completely manual before, is now done entirely by a system. If I go into the import invoice, where we had all the manual steps that we had to go through to import the invoice, put all the data into the system and upload a digital copy of it, you can see now we've automated most of that. So that, again, the system is picking up that email that comes in, it's automatically adding it to the accounting system, it's automatically pulling the data out and putting it into the system. So that's all fully automated, that part of the process. Just as a side, I haven't taken into account any things like exceptions in this case, because I've kept it very, very simple for demonstration purposes. Once we've designed that new process, though, what we do now need to go is to go back through the Quantify and update the durations according to how long these steps will take or how long the system will take to do this particular step. You'll notice that one step's been removed completely from here. But obviously some of them will be much, much quicker because you don't have a person sitting there going, right, reading something and then typing data into something else. So, you can see how some of these might get down to minutes or seconds compared to what they were before. So now we've got essentially the process. We've got an as is that's been baselined for quantification data, and we've got a to be that now has the new quantification information. So straight away we can see the cost has gone down and the processing time has gone down. And again, you might just want to have a quick look through the data to see what that looks like. Now, one of the features that Skore has, I don't think that I've shown before on one of the drop-in sessions, but is really powerful, is the two Quantify dashboards I've shown you have been specific to those processes. But with the release of Spinnaker last year, one of the things we introduced was the ability to run Quantify across the whole workspace. So if I click on Quantify from the workspace view, initially, if you've not used this before, it's going to go and get everything. So if you've got lots of quantified data across lots of processes, it might take a few seconds to load it initially. But what I want to show you here is over at the top right hand side, there's a button called Select Scope. So it allows us to pick specific processes. So I can, in this case, I'm literally going to select those two processes, but I could get them by folder name or by tag or by process ownership if I wanted to. So these were called process invoices. So there I've typed in the name, and you can see now why it's so important to have those descriptive titles and names for the processes, because I can clearly see here that processes invoices, I've got as is and to be, so I can select both of those. Click save, and then what the tool will do now is it will filter down to just show the data from those two processes. Now, this is designed for actually being able to aggregate data from processes. So this overview is going to be showing you the total cost of the two processes. But what I want to show you here is if I drill into the duration tab and I just scroll down to this second layer of graphs, what this is doing is showing you the difference between the processes in your selection. So now it's showing me the difference between the as is and the to be process. And so straight away you can see the difference in duration, for example. We've massively decreased the delay time in that process, and we've halved the actual processing time as well. So we've speeded the process up, but we've actually reduced, and we've also reduced the amount of time that individuals are spending working on that process. Similarly with the costs, if I go and click through the costs and again scroll down to that same place, we can clearly see that difference. We've halved the cost here. Now, go back to what I said earlier on. Okay, that's interesting. We can see there's an £8 difference in this case between the two new processes. Does that justify us investing in actually going and implementing this new process that we've designed? And that's really where the simulator becomes really handy, because then you can start to say, right, well, how many of these invoices are we processing? So let's assume we're doing 100 invoices a week, but we want to look at this over the period of a year. I hit the apply button, again, scroll down to this, and you can see the difference between the current process is costing us 80 grand a year, whereas with the new version of the process, it's nearly half the cost. So we could be saving around $40,000 or $35,000 pounds even for that process. So it helps you make that decision about whether you're going to go and implement this, and the cost of potential licenses and that thing, the sort of thing for that automation. Once again, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along today. So next week's session is me again, and we're going to be looking at roles and responsibilities, trying to drive accountability, looking at the RACI type features in the product and how we can use those to, again, understand how people interact with processes and so on. So hopefully we'll see you guys there next week. And thank you very much.